Hello. I come to you from New York by way of Amsterdam. It's nice to be in Lisbon, first time. Basically, I wanted to give a presentation to you all about sort of a lot of the lessons that we learned from Insurgency. Maybe some of you guys are aspiring video game developers yourselves, or interested in software development in general. We are sort of an indie startup that started about 4 or 5 years ago. And our game has done pretty well for sort of where we came from. So that is one aspect of what I want to talk to you guys about. Just out of curiosity, how many of you have heard of Insurgency before? Okay, that's pretty good. How many of you guys have played Insurgency before? Okay. And how many of you would consider yourselves good at it? Okay, nice. That's cool. So I'm going to start out sort of, I think in order to explain everything that I want to get to, I kind of have to give you guys some context, like where I came from, what my background is. So I'm going to start kind of at the very beginning and work my way up to the present, and then share some, some tidbits. So basically, I got into game development when I was very young. I started when I was like 13, I guess, if you can consider this type of stuff to be game development, which I do, looking back on it. This is sort of where it all started for me. My cousin introduced me to StarCraft when I was like 12 or 13, like the first game. And I started playing it a bunch, and I noticed that there were all these like cool like custom missions that people were making. And so I like looked into it and figured out that there's this editor. There's this way that I can myself make these cool custom missions. And so I started to dabble with that, and didn't do anything that great, but that was sort of, I think, where it all began for me. The next game that really sort of was the beginning, I would say, of like my sort of interest in shooters in general, and sort of my style and like the type of shooter that I enjoy playing was with Rainbow Six Rogue Spear. This is a game that I played a lot when I was younger. And once again, it had a very strong like mission editing tools and map editing tools that I spent some time actually working within. And these tools allowed you to kind of take a map and restructure like where the spawn points are and where block off different parts of the map so you can create like different gameplay and things like that. This was sort of like my first experience creating like levels for a shooter game specifically. And then sort of the next evolution was Operation Flashpoint for me, which was sort of like Rainbow Six, but like on a much larger scale. And it had a lot of more advanced AI behaviors and cool missions, very realistic. It sort of turned into what Arma is now, which I'm sure many more of you are familiar with Arma than you are with Operation Flashpoint, because it might have been before a lot of your times. I don't know. How many of you guys have played Operation Flashpoint, out of curiosity? Yeah, okay, a couple of you. Okay, cool. So then there's the influence of successful total conversion mods, and that's what TC stands for, total conversion. Basically, the concept of taking one game that you could play, and it is what it is, but you have the tools to create something completely different. Like the developers give you that opportunity to take their game and transform it into something entirely different. And for like the first time, I think this was like pre-indie. This was like, now there's indie, which is like, small guys making cool games. But like back then, there was no way for like, people that didn't have a lot of experience making games to actually create something. And this is how they did it. This was their way of creating something, their vision of like a cool game without any money or funding, or much experience even either. A lot of these guys were experienced, but a lot of them weren't, but they still managed to create some really cool stuff. Starting with Team Fortress Classic, which eventually got bundled with Half-Life, Counter-Strike, which Min Lee gave a presentation here last year. He created that with Jess Cliff, who works at Valve. That eventually got commercialized. And then Day of Defeat, which I sort of made large because this was one of my favorites, of all time, and there's a lot of influence there in Insurgency as well. For those of you who have played both, you can probably see that. Some other cool ones that I thought were worth mentioning here is Natural Selection, which was a mod for Half-Life 1, and eventually became its own commercial release, Natural Selection 2. Project Reality for Battlefield 1942, and Desert Combat, which is sort of cut off, but that was for Battlefield 1942 as well. So then, once I was sort of inspired by these mods and started doing some of this video game creation stuff on my own, I decided that I wanted to try to make my own mod, total conversion mod. And it really started out with Red Orchestra. Red Orchestra, I founded when I was about 14 years old. I was really young. And started building up a team all around the world to basically create a mod for Unreal Tournament that transformed it into a World War II Eastern European battlefield, essentially. Inspired by Day of Defeat, inspired by the movie that just came out at the time, Enemy at the Gates, I think. And originally it was supposed to be like the single-player experience, because Red Orchestra was like the spy network, this Russian spy network during World War II. But eventually, we kind of realized that single player might be too much for what we can handle, so we decided to make it a multiplayer game. And these are some really early screenshots of Red Orchestra when it was a mod for Unreal Tournament 2003, back in 2004, something like that. You can't really see it. I wasn't expecting all the glare, but and then this is sort of notable because the mod actually won first place in the 2004 Mod of the Year Awards on ModDB. And this was sort of my first, I would say, recognition that what I'm doing is actually something that people are really enjoying and that I'm personally very excited about and want to keep doing. Also, Cliffy B at Epic around this time asked me to do an interview with New York Times. This was also like a very exciting thing for me. Sort of being recognized, especially at such a young age. I was sort of caught off guard by it. I didn't really know how to handle it. And before I get to Insurgency, I'll just say that with Red Orchestra, what ended up happening is it was very successful and won these awards and got all this recognition. And there was a lot of new guys on the team that I recruited myself. Essentially the owners of Tripwire Interactive now, if any of you guys are familiar with them. They make Killing Floor, and they also commercialized Red Orchestra originally. And these guys, they were a lot older than me. A lot of them had families, and they were kind of ready to start a business out of Red Orchestra. And I was only 16 at the time, so and I come from a family that college is not an option. Like, you're going to college, no questions asked. So I didn't really, the whole concept of being a part of a business was completely, impossible for me to even consider at this point in my life. So I basically signed over my IP to them and decided to keep modding instead. And that's when I co-founded Insurgency. So basically, being inspired by all these Half-Life mods prior to Red Orchestra, I thought it'd be really cool to mod Half-Life 2 when Half-Life 2 came out. At the time, I basically kind of wanted to do something very different than Red Orchestra, something more modern, because I was getting kind of fatigued, I think, by the World War II, and thought there was a lot of opportunity in a more modern setting. And obviously, the war in Iraq had just begun, and I thought it'd be very interesting to sort of allow people to play a game where they're sort of fighting in a conflict that's ongoing. Like, that had never really been done before. And also to represent it in a very unbiased way, like it's a very gray area type of conflict. And at the time, there actually was a mod for Half-Life 2 already planned called Operation Counter-Insurgency. And instead of trying to compete against this mod, because the premise was very similar, I decided to approach them and basically combine forces. And that's how I met Andrew Spearin, who is the other co-founder of Insurgency and who's now the creative director at New World Interactive. So these are some more screenshots of the Insurgency mod for Half-Life 2. It was released for free as a free mod for Half-Life 2. We worked on it for probably 3 years or something. Worked on it for a long time, and probably had over 20 people all over the world working on it. Some really talented guys. A lot of them actually went straight into the industry right after Insurgency. A lot of them got picked up by big studios like Blizzard and Crytek and Ubisoft. and Microsoft Game Studios. And I wanted to end on this screenshot because you can actually find the same level in the current game, the commercial standalone game, and also will be in our new version of Insurgency that we actually just announced yesterday. And I'll get to that at the end. So then I had my first industry experience, and this was, I was 17 years old, and it was right before college, and basically the creators of a mod that I mentioned earlier called Desert Combat for Battlefield 1942, I think they had some arrangement with DICE, who make the Battlefield series, where I think they got the rights to their assets, and it sort of became the basis, actually, of the modern-day Battlefield series, was Desert Combat mod for Battlefield 1942. And as a result, these guys, they didn't end up working with DICE, but they ended up sort of doing their own thing. And they actually got hired by THQ to form their own studio called Chaos Studios, which was based in Manhattan. And I grew up in New York, so I thought, like, hey, this is a studio nearby, and I'm looking for an internship right now. I have to have an internship for school. And I actually kind of know these guys. I know these guys' work. So I emailed them, and sure enough, they knew my work, and they were like, yeah, come intern for us. Sure, no problem. So this is my first time kind of getting sort of a feel of what it's like to work in the video game industry without really being fully immersed in it because I was just an intern. But I got sort of a good sense of sort of all of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes to make a AAA game. Because this was like a 60-person, multi-million-dollar project called Frontlines Fuel of War. And maybe the reason why you guys haven't heard of it, if you haven't heard of it, is because it didn't really do that well, I don't think. And I think I kind of foresaw a lot of that while I was there, because I sort of looked at it from the angle of like, hey, I was able to make this like cool, mod sort of game with a group of people with virtually no money or resources, and here's all this money and resources being thrown at something. It seems a little bit wasteful almost to me, all the resources that went into this AAA game, and arguably AAA games in general if they're not well executed. But this started to get me thinking and sort of like evaluating how I would approach things differently if I were to one day have my own business. So then there's the first commercial game, and this happened after college. So I went to University of Vermont for 4 years. I studied computer science and history. So up until this point, I wasn't really much of a programmer. I had a 3D background. I made like the characters for Insurgency, and I made the character animations for Insurgency. And I was pretty much like a project lead / director of sorts. But I never really I knew some basic programming from high school. There were some courses, but I never really did much advanced programming for video games up until that point in time. So I kind of wanted to utilize college as a resource to expand my programming abilities so that one day I could, become a more advanced programmer and actually, in addition to designing games, actually write code for them as well. So this is actually a screenshot from the early access version of Insurgency. So after college, I formed Nimble Interactive. I decided that I felt like I had what it took to sort of start my own business. I knew a lot of people still that I had worked with earlier who wanted to work with me, and also a lot of people who worked on Insurgency mod that wanted to take it commercially. So we kind of got started on this, and it was a really rough process. There was a lot of ups and downs through the development of Insurgency, and I'm going to go more into that later. But I just want to show you guys the evolution of Insurgency through screenshots in a way. And this is sort of, I want to show this screenshot first because it's very early. And like this kit UI, like this inventory menu, doesn't even exist anymore. It was completely recreated. This is the concept art, the promotional art that we shipped with the game with on Steam eventually. And this is sort of like what Insurgency is like now. This is a map called Buriz. It's like an Iraq map, and featuring this game mode called Push, which is like an attack and defend game mode. Sort of comparable to Rush in Battlefield, for those of you who play Battlefield. It's a very staple Insurgency map that was not only in the game, but it was also originally in the mod as well. So this brings me to the next part, which is basically discussing like what Insurgency did well and what I feel like were our shortcomings and areas that we could have done better and will in the future want to address. So with regards to reviews, we got a 74% Metacritic rating, which isn't that high. Obviously, we would have wanted a lot higher rating than that. Keep in mind that this is the press, really, like established press. And surprisingly, we got a 92% user rating on Steam. So the players themselves really love our game, but like sort of the traditional media is sort of, has their sort of nitpicks about it. And that sort of brings me to this last point of like press opinion versus player opinion, and how the press does sort of view your game through a different lens than players do. With players, they may not necessarily be very forgiving, but ultimately they want a fun experience, good gameplay. So if you deliver good gameplay to players, even if it's a little bit rough around the edges, they will look upon that kindly, because they know that they've heard perhaps that you've come from an indie background and don't have a lot of funding and have only a couple of people working on this project. It's not an easy thing to make a game, nonetheless a shooter, as opposed to like a side-scrolling 2D game or something like that. The press are more likely to compare your game to a lot of the other more mainstream, AAA even games out there, which makes them a little bit more harsh, I would say. So like I said, so the experience that we shipped, it had strong gameplay, and this is one of the reasons why it was initially successful, is because when we had that Steam presence and people were getting the game and they were playing it for the first time, they were having fun. So even though like there wasn't enough replay value yet, and there wasn't maybe enough content yet, and maybe there were a couple of bugs and it was a little bit rough around the edges, it was still fun. And that's a really important thing to stress here is the importance of delivering a fun game. So like, there was less content and features than we wanted. And we even, because we were actually in early access for a while, we were in early access for 9 months. And during that time, we iterated on the game quite a lot, basically working with our community to improve it, which was at the time was a very new approach to developing games. Now, obviously, everybody knows about early access, but I think we were like one of the first 3 games or something on Steam Early Access. And it's actually funny because we started doing it ourselves on our own website, selling keys on our own website, early access keys, ourselves before Steam even decided they were going to do it. And then they approached us and they said, like, hey, we're doing this ourselves. You should put your game on it. So that's how that happened. But basically, we wanted to keep developing Insurgency and make it something really awesome by the time it shipped, but we ran out of money. And so it was like, okay, what do we do now? We got to ship it, So we kind of huddled all together and decided what the final core things are that we have to finish to get the game released. And we got that done. And we kind of knew that our community was going to be a little bit disappointed that we hadn't fulfilled some of our promises that we had for the game, the things that we had said that we wanted to accomplish by the time we shipped. So what we actually did is we made this post on our forums and an announcement to our community, and we said, like, look, like we know that the game is not where we want it to be, but the reality is that we have to ship now, and what we're going to do to make up for it is instead of it being a $20 game, which is what it was in early access, we're going to drop the price to $15, just to show goodwill to you guys that this is not the $20 product that we imagined. This is a strong $15 product, and we recognize that. And furthermore, we are going to commit to working on this project post-release and keep adding more content, more features, and keep getting closer and closer to completing our vision post-release, and do it for free and not charge you for DLC or anything like that. Just free updates, free features, free bug fixes, free content, free maps, free weapons, whatever we decide to make to sort of get closer to our completed vision of Insurgency, we were going to release to the community for free. And we even outlined what a lot of those goals were, so that we kind of gave our community like a roadmap, like what we planned on delivering to them post-release. And this, I think, is sort of a unique thing. I don't think a lot of developers do this. So then brings up the free updates, and that's kind of where I just left off. So Valve gave like a really good presentation at Steam Dev Days a couple of years ago, where they talked about the TF2 approach to free updates. And they actually showed a bunch of like numbers and graphs, and they showed like unit sales and like revenue and player counts and all these figures that like, like when you're doing like research to try and find this data, it's not very easy to find. And when you have Valve like showing you this data and explaining how like, every 2 or 3 months they release this free update for Team Fortress 2, they put the game on sale, they put out a big press release about it, and they see their numbers like shoot up, they make a lot of money, and the player counts just consistently go like higher and higher and higher over time, because like it's a community-driven game development. And we kind of were very influenced by this presentation, and it also fit into our own modding history, and we decided to apply it to Insurgency. So we got a very positive outside response for it, and even like some like Reddit memes have gone up that made the front page of Reddit and stuff, because like people really love us for this. The fact that we released these major content updates and these major feature updates for free with like no questions answered or asked, and like there's all these game companies out there that charge so much for it, that they kind of see us as different in that sense. And one thing I want to note is there is a little bit of an internal struggle with the free update approach that we've sort of had to deal with, mainly being that there's a little bit of fatigue that you get, working on the same project for so many years. And the other aspect is that obviously, since we already shipped a game and we made money off of it, we kind of want to use that money also to create new games and develop even more exciting things than what we can do with Insurgency at its current place. So this next thing, this is one of the memes that I was talking about. It's got 2 million views. It was up on Reddit. And I don't know if I could click on this link. Could we do that? Or this is the update that it was based on. No. Is it going to work? No? One sec. Okay. Technical difficulties. Okay. There we go. You can trust it. We get audio too, or no? That'd be great if we can get audio.
With free content for all players. 3 new weapons, a brand new cooperative game mode, a new map, and more. Introducing Conquer, a new non-linear cooperative mode, where the security team must capture and hold all 3 objective areas on the map. The enemy's strength becomes diminished as their hidden weapon caches are discovered and destroyed. Our new map, Kandagal, is inspired by the rural Afghani landscape. This misty environment features a river valley with a bridge crossing to an adjacent close quarters town. The Sterling was a standard issue submachine gun in the British military until 1994. This 9mm hunk of metal also saw use by former British colonists. 5.56 caliber IMI Galil carries a standard 35-round magazine, as well as an optional 75-round drum for support classes. The Smith & Wesson Model 10 inspired revolver has been carried by law enforcement, military, and insurgent groups alike.
Yeah, you could kill it. It's fine. It's not exactly how I anticipated that going down. But I think it gets the point across. I don't know if we can go back to the presentation. Basically, I don't know if you guys are able to hear him, but each sort of sequence of that was sort of introducing a new feature or map or weapon or something that we had implemented for this particular update. And it was a pretty massive update, and it was just sort of a good example of these updates that we did, which were just like really substantial. And we didn't charge for them, and they just like, we didn't fragment our community, we we put the game on sale, and more people would get the game. We would make more money. More people would end up playing it afterwards as a result. And basically just following in Valve's footsteps, I guess, in that sense. So in terms of player counts, basically you can see this graph. This is the graph of our player numbers for Insurgency. This is early access. So you could see that like our early access audience was really a fraction of what our full release audience was. But that's good because in early access, you don't want to market your game. You don't want too many people playing because it's going to be sort of rough. And the goal is to just get that feedback, get in that iterative loop with your community. And that's what we did. And when we released, you could see that a lot of people say that when you release a game, that's when you're going to have the most people playing, that's when you're going to make the most money and all that. But none of that turned out to be true for Insurgency. You could see that our current player numbers now are higher pretty substantially than what they were when we first released. And you can kind of tell this sort of the stepping stair thing that Valve had talked about in their presentation. Basically each one of these spikes represents a big update. I'm pretty sure this was our free weekend, and we released a major update to go along with that, with new maps and new weapons and stuff. Same concept. Let me go back. So our largest player count was 16,000 almost. And I think right now we average between about 1,000 and 4,000 people playing at any moment of the day, just to give you guys an idea of what our community is like. And another thing worth mentioning with the drop-offs is that it's pretty common that when you put out a big update or a big release that you're going to have a lot of people playing, and then there's going to be less people playing. Oscar talked about that in his last presentation. But what we noticed is that the drop-off depends a lot on retention. So, if your game has poor retention, you're going to see a much steeper drop-off. And if your game has higher retention, you're going to see less of a drop-off. So this has been kind of a side goal of ours all along, and we've looked at the data, for each update, and we're like, okay, what could we do to make the retention better in our game for the next update, so that when we do see a big influx of players again, that the player counts will stay higher and not drop off too much. This is something that we pay close attention to, and being a multiplayer, co-op-driven game, retention is something that's very important to us. So then unit sales. So I already talked to you guys about the price drop at full release and why we did that. The discounts are huge, basically putting the game at 50% off for a Steam sale, or even going 80% off for a 3-day period or something like that. Especially since Steam changed their whole design to be based on discoverability. That changed a lot, and now you can put your game at 80, 90% off, and people will see it. People will discover it. Valve doesn't have to promote it on the front page in order for you to get the visibility. People will find out about it. One misconception that I think a lot of people have is that when you put your game out on a big discount, that you might get a lot of sales, but you're probably not going to make that much more money than you normally make because it's going to balance itself out. Instead of people paying $15 for the game, they're spending $1.50 or $2. It takes a lot more people to make up for that $15. So you're not going to make that much more money. But that's simply not true. And this is something that even Valve has suggested to us, dropping our price even more. Because as developers, we become very attached to our games, and we think, if we put our price too low, we're devaluing our IP. We're making our game seem cheap, But what ended up happening, what we saw is that every time we did a 80% off flash sale or something like that, we made a lot of money, exponentially more money than we make when we're not on sale. And not only that, but when the sale's over, our baseline sales are still pretty much the same as what they were before the sale. So as of today, we're at about 2.35 million units sold. That includes Humble Bundle and resellers. I think we're at about 1.5 million is the Steam-specific Steam purchase total. and an additional like 800, 900,000 more. We had a really big Humble bundle back in 2015, I think, or 2014, yeah. So now is the section where I'm going to talk about the obstacles that we faced. There's a lot of them. The first one being money troubles. Raising money was very challenging. We ended up having like 6 or 7 different angel investors that put up money, but never really in substantial sums. So we were always kind of going, not necessarily day to day, but we were going very month to month. We were like, okay, we're good for this month, but like, can we survive another 60 days? I'm not sure. And that's a very troubling thought to have to go through when you're developing a game, because like, if you know me, you know that I love making the game, and I love being involved in the process. And worrying about financial stuff is not really fun when you just want to make a game. And we had talked to some publishers, and they were sort of offensive and sobering, I put, because like one publisher offered us like a 10% royalty after they would give us the money that we needed to ship the game, but after it released, they would keep 90% and we would get 10%. And then maybe after 100,000 units, we would get like 15% or like 20% or something like that. And we were just like, no, we're not going to do that. The next thing was difficulty with forecasting. So like, there's not a whole lot of good data out there on like what the average game sells and like what my game should sell. You kind of have to ask people in the industry. You kind of have to know people and get people's opinions on the matter. Like in our case, I have a good friend, Chuck Brungard at Ilphonic, who sort of told me what he would recommend us forecasting at, and that was 300,000 units, and that's what we ended up forecasting at. So marketing unknowns. This is another thing. Like if you're creating a video game company or working for one or whatever, the whole concept of marketing is obviously something everybody thinks about, and you know about it. You know these publishers put in millions of dollars into marketing, and there's a big question of like, is it really necessary? There's games out there that blow up without getting any marketing. So this is something that we kind of struggled with early on, and we didn't really know what to believe, because one person would tell us that marketing is super important, while another person would tell us that marketing doesn't matter at all. But what we did in the end is we took a marketing deal that we saw as sort of an insurance policy, quote unquote, because we didn't have to pay anything up front to get this marketing support. We pay it in the back end, and it was pretty heavy in the back end. And we didn't love it, but we accepted it because it meant that people like PC Gamer or Rock Paper Shotgun are more likely to run a story on us than they would if we didn't sign up with a marketing partner. The next thing was trouble standing out. So like we've managed to stand out now. Like you guys can see by our unit sales, like we have a pretty substantial audience, but it wasn't always that way. And especially during early access, you could see how low our player numbers were. We had a lot of people that were just saying like, oh, like this game, like what makes it so great? It's just another shooter. And these are coming from a lot of people that actually haven't played the game. The people that were playing the game at the time were like, okay, I see what you guys are doing, but it still needs a lot of work. And those were sort of the people that we got in the feedback loop with. But this was sort of a big problem for us standing out, and sort of demoralizing for our team members a little bit, that the game was constantly being judged as being just another shooter, when we knew that it wasn't. We knew that it was something. And just for those of you who aren't familiar with Insurgency, some of the things that really make it distinct from other shooters is sort of its grittiness and its intensity, and its emphasis on teamwork. There's most shooters that you have like the weapon like attached to the middle of the screen, you have the crosshair, and it just goes to the center of the screen always. Our game is a little different. Like the weapon kind of moves off of the camera a little bit, like very smoothly though, not like clunky like Arma. It's sort of like a nice unique like middle ground that base feel, I think, is sort of the core of our game, just that base core like experience. And then on top of that, we have a couple of really cool, unique game modes and game mechanics, such as our respawn on capture mechanic, In one of our game modes called Firefight, for instance, it's like 3 objectives that you have to capture, and your team doesn't respawn, but if somebody on your team captures one of the objectives, then your team responds. So it's sort of this very exciting experience that no game has ever tried before, and it's also sort of turned into a very competitive thing, and a lot of competitive play has sort of evolved out of it. But it sort of has that real sense of intensity, and if everybody's dead except one person, that last guy's alive, everybody's hoping that he's going to capture that point to bring everybody back. It's sort of cool. So the thing here too is lack of centralized creative direction. At first, I tried this thing called creative democracy, I'm going to call it, where basically everyone would sit around in a circle and just talk about creative decisions and ideas and things that we should do for the game. And it didn't really work very well, and I'll get a little bit more into that later. So the next thing here is small team. So we did not exceed 10 people in pre-alpha. So that's really small for a shooter game, especially. In early access, we expanded to about 16, 17 people, I think, because we had more money and we could hire a couple more people to complete the game. This included things like a particle pass, voiceover, which we didn't have any of in early access at one point. More levels, more polished levels, iterating on the levels to make the gameplay stronger, since obviously level design is a really important aspect of gameplay when it comes to shooters. Developers had to fill many shoes is another part of this. So having such a small team, it meant that our level designers had to also be environment artists. Me, I was a programmer, a level designer, an animator, creative director. The list kind of goes on. In the pre-alpha phase, I had to kind of step up and learn a lot of different skill sets that originally I wasn't very comfortable with, but I had to in order to get this game shipped. And that goes for not just me, but a lot of people on our team. Inexperience. So yeah, this was my first commercial game. I had made a couple of mods before that had been pretty successful, but mod development is different than game development. There's a lot of similarities though, and I will encourage some of you that are interested in getting into games to consider the mod approach as you're sort of finessing your skills, because it's a great way to learn more about game development and also introduce your work to a large audience without needing money or marketing or anything like that. And also, I will say that as in the industry now, we hire modders. It's a great portfolio if you have a cool mod that you made for a game, especially if it's more along the lines of a total conversion and not just a simple tweak to a game. If you actually take a game that has a software development kit out or a level editor or both, and actually do something really unique and cool with it, that makes a great portfolio piece for companies. And a lot of the biggest companies out there hire modders, including us. So industry experienced developers, not easy to attract. So like I said, we were very limited on money. So I had to find people that were willing to work for less, and that's not very easy to get high quality developers when you don't have a big checkbook. And it took a while to establish a strong creative process. So what I explained before, that creative democracy approach, that was the beginning, and then eventually we established a stronger creative process, which I will explain more later. So here's a kind of long-winded quote, but it was actually part of a podcast that I thought was very relevant to this discussion, because a lot of what I'm trying to talk about is nimbleness and adaptivity. And I thought this was a really good quote by Amy Hennig, who was the writer of Uncharted and the creative director at Naughty Dog. And I'll just read it. I think nimbleness is a requirement of game development, and I think the best games are developed in a very iterative way. It's invention, experimentation, and engineering. It's not the way films are made, and therefore, because we're in the roles we are, we can invent and adapt along with the rest of the game development. And And I think that's how you get a better story. Unfortunately, I think it's also a terrifying process because you're always working without a net. You're kind of figuring it out as you go by necessity. So I thought this was sort of an important quote to share because like this is a very important aspect of what I would like to share with you guys that we discovered with Insurgency, and also what I've learned talking to other developers in the across the industry, is that remaining nimble and adaptive can open up new possibilities. So conventional wisdom, makes you think that you have to have a very strong plan, very well designed from the beginning, and you have to stick to that plan. If you deviate too far from it, you're going to get lost or something. And that's not really the way video games work. And not knowing what the end result will be is uncomfortable and scary, as Amy put it, terrifying. But it's sort of the way we have to work as game developers. Because sometimes you uncover something that should be in your game at a later point in time, and it would be a mistake not to consider it. Even if you're running low on money or whatever, like, you should always be able to adapt and be flexible depending on the landscape around you. Letting the community help shape Insurgency proved to be a very successful approach for us. In early access, we got a tremendous amount of feedback from our community. We constantly iterated on the game and improved it. And basically, I think I think we're an example of people that actually did early access right. I think there's a lot of developers that perpetually stayed in early access for a really long time and sort of gave early access a bad reputation. And I think that whenever we see like a Gamma Sutra article or something on this topic, we try and put in our story there too, interject to remind people that there's a good side to early access. The transparency side, the side of always letting your community know what you're trying to accomplish. With us, when we announced early access, there's that section that allows you to describe what people are going to play. We made it very clear what they're going to experience, and we didn't try and trick people into getting what they thought was a finished product and then discovering that it's not. We were very transparent with them that it was not, and that we wanted their help to make it better and get closer to completion. So another thing is developers need to be flexible. So it's not just the studio deciding that we're going to change this course of direction and try something a little bit different. The team has to go along with it, because if you have a team that is uncomfortable with flexibility and wants to stay down this rigid path, then you're going to have a lot of internal conflict arise because you may have a creative director or a CEO that's we need to do this, we need to pivot in order to stand out and for this game to be successful. But if half of the team is and stressing about it, then you're going to have a lot of internal drama and conflict as a result. And then I'm going to be talking a lot about strong infrastructure and organization towards the end of this presentation, because I think it's really important, especially when you have a distributed team like we had, located all over the world, working online together to create a game. Having a strong infrastructure and organization could make this so much smoother and be the difference, I think, between success and failure. And also sometimes a curveball is thrown your way. So for instance, what if a game gets announced that happens to be shipping around the same time that your game plans on shipping? It's a similar game, the developers are competent, and now you have a new competitor that you did not have when you first started developing your game. What do you do then? Do you just give up? Do you stay the course and just ship it as you were planned? Or do you adapt and try and come up with a better strategy? That is sort of up to you, but I would say that you should consider adapting and trying to distinguish yourself more. So the business side of things should not be underestimated. So the video game industry isn't a bunch of robots, contrary to popular thought. This picture is me with Charlie Cleveland, the creator of Natural Selection, and Michael Chang, the creator of Blade Symphony, at Steam Dev Days. And it's just an example of networking at a conference and how it's important. Because when you meet these people in the industry that make these successful games, they provide invaluable knowledge, and a lot of that knowledge allowed us to make smart decisions, I would say, during different points of our process. And not just networking side, but also learning about trends as well, because the video game industry is constantly changing and adapting. And raising money is an important aspect of running a team. I mentioned this earlier. If you could not have to worry about money while you're developing a game, that is a much better way to go. But don't sign a bad publishing deal. And legal counsel is also important. So like lawyers and IP protection and things like that. Don't forget about that. So then this goes back to that point about democratic creativity and it ultimately failing. Just a quick water break. So debating features and systems as a group can sometimes get emotional. Especially artists tend to get even more emotional, I found, than programmers. Because programmers think kind of logically, and artists are very driven by emotion, I think. But sometimes people get very attached to certain ideas, and they want something very badly, in the game, and they'll fight for it to the death. And sometimes things can get kind of ugly when you let the team feel like everybody has an equal voice in what will eventually be decided. What we've found has been a lot more successful is having a centralized creative vision that is inclusive of feedback. So you need to have a creative director. You need to have a game director. You need to have somebody who's going to make the final decision in the end and make whatever decision they feel is the best decision. That person needs to be able to take feedback from the rest of the team. And to be able, somebody should, if you feel very passionate about something, you should feel comfortable going to the creative director and suggesting your idea to that person. And that person, if they're a good creative director, should hear your idea and consider it. So this is another interesting thing that we learned. Developers are most effective when working on things they enjoy working on. So there's a big difference between working on something that your boss is telling you that you should be working on versus working on something that you want to be working on yourself. And this is a reason why, for instance, Valve has this very flat structure where they allow developers to pretty much do whatever they want and be a part of whatever project they want to be on, because it does produce higher quality work. And for us, since we don't quite have that flexibility, we try and give our developers that sense of picking the work that they give or that they do, with the occasional exception of us being like, well, we kind of need you to do this. But we understand that aspect of developer motivation being driven by working on things that are enjoyable. And another aspect of this is sometimes people haven't yet discovered what they enjoy the most, I've discovered. And this has happened a couple of times on our team. And I imagine it happens in other industries, in other companies as well, where basically you have, for instance, a level designer who has a strict level design background, but he's more of a level designer that is more into the polishing of the levels sort of side. And maybe he hasn't done environment art and creating art yet in his career, but you could tell that might be something that he's really passionate about, or he or she is really passionate about and really interested in. So it's good to, in my experience, give people that opportunity to learn different aspects of game development if it's something that they might be more interested in than what they are currently doing. And in my experience, it's actually gotten some really good results. It doesn't seem like a smart decision in the short term, because it's sort of like you're losing, as a CEO, you kind of see it as you're losing money over it because the person's not creating content. But in the long run, it's sort of like you're investing in that developer because they're eventually going to be working on the things that they really like working on and at a higher level. So the next thing is developer etiquette. Should be enforced, because while certain traits should be encouraged, others should be unacceptable. So this pretty much covers team culture and sort of rules on a team, and how it shouldn't just be this open landscape where people can do whatever the hell they want. There has to be some rules in place, and there's a big difference between constructive feedback and negativity, and you don't want to have a team that's negative. You want to have a team that's excited and helping each other and and not being quiet when they should give feedback, but giving that feedback, but doing so in a way that's respectful of other developers. And one thing that I've found is that the most quality developers on our team, and all teams I've worked with, are usually guys or girls that don't require micromanagement. Like they kind of are able to kind of fit in where they feel they can contribute the most. And especially from a small team like us, where we don't have like producers like micromanaging everybody, it's sort of this sink or swim sort of mentality that like you either have to fit in and find your place on our team and contribute in a positive way, or you're going to find yourself not being effective and you may not last with us. And another thing to kind of drive this home is we do these performance evaluations, which are really useful, which basically it's like a multiple choice thing where we basically outline all the different things that we find valuable in our developers, and the developers themselves fill it out, like what they think of themselves in these categories, and then I fill it out, and then we like compare, and we get to see if we're on the same page, and if we're not, we get on the same page, and we do that over a call, and we make sure that after the evaluation, like there's no miscommunication between the management and the development. And this is sort of goes into the team culture. These things sort of define your team culture, like what your stance is on these things. And these are my stances. Obviously, every development studio is different. So you could take this with a grain of salt if you want to do things differently. So another thing for like indie development that I thought would be useful mentioning is there's ways that you could save money and still develop a game that might be on Steam and featured and whatever. The first thing is embracing the freelance model. So you shouldn't have this impression that in order to make a game like Insurgency, for instance, you have to start a studio and have X number of on-site employees all working together. Employees are actually the most expensive cost for making a video game. Your burn rate every month, you find that in our case, compensation is pretty much like the highest cost that we have every month, like our team. And employees are even more expensive than contractors. Contractors, they work from home. They could work on other projects potentially, depending on the deal you work out with them. It's a lot cheaper of a structure than having an on-site team, and also you don't have to worry about rent and internet and like all these costs associated with having a studio. The next thing is incorporating a profit-sharing structure. So this is something that we did that kind of ties into the freelance aspect, because what we were able to do is we were able to pay people less because we were also on top of what we were paying them, giving them a piece of what the game eventually made, what NWI's profit was off of the game. So it's not like we were just saying, oh, we're not going to pay you anything and you'll get a royalty like some indie developers do. We recognize that we need to pay people in order to get the talent that we need, but in order to pay them what we could afford, we had to give them a piece of the back end. And this was also a very motivating thing for these guys. And even though they weren't being paid a lot, they were still very motivated and excited about their work because they knew if it was successful, they'd be sharing in the success. And I'm proud to say that we have done some pretty big profit distributions to our team. And a lot of these guys are going to be with us for a long time as a result, I would say. So the next thing is focusing first on PC. Like you don't want to, or just I would say one platform, but PC is easier than like a console platform. It's just PC development's a lot cheaper and more flexible than console development. I think it's a lot safer of a bet to save the console development stuff for later. Using Kinect for motion capture. This doesn't save you a lot of money, but it saved us some money, and I thought it's worth throwing it in there because it's sort of this creative thing that some people have figured out a way to use Microsoft Kinect in order to get like legitimate motion capture data. So instead of spending like thousands of dollars to get mocap for your game, you could try and figure that out. Just a tip. The next thing here is the hybrid business model. of having a core team on site and the rest of the team freelance works pretty well. And that's sort of what we're doing now. So we went from being fully freelance to this sort of hybrid model where we have an 8-person studio now in Amsterdam. And we have 30 developers on our team all over the world. Well, 22 all over the world. And it's working pretty well. Because we have a very strong infrastructure in place that allows the 22 to communicate and organize very well. So the 8 on-site people, it's just even more organized because we're there together. And it represents a nice middle ground between the freelance model and the AAA, big studio model. And then this sort of brings me into like the last thing, which is that project management should be fun and effective. And that organization is really important, and investing in this organization is really worthwhile. And this is sort of something that I really wanted to sort of end on, because I feel like for those of you who are looking into organizing teams or being involved in game development production, this might be the most useful thing in the entire presentation that I've given for you guys, because we've established this really cool organization system using a couple of applications that is really effective, and like our team is really productive with it, and it's very social, it's very integrated with all of our infrastructure, and so it kind of it's the two main parts of it are Trello, which some of you guys might be familiar with. It's a project management tool. It's completely web-based, and Slack, which is a communication tool, and sort of combining them together. Sorry, I'm a tad under the weather. So for Trello, we sort of have these. We sort of have the high-level direction and low-level project management. I would say they're sort of separate. On the high level, we have like our company goals, which include bulletins, milestones, and meetings. And then in the low level, we have like per project boards that focus on tasks, issues, and also like reference pictures and things like that, like concept art. And then we have, we have the company roadmap, the project-specific board, and you can also have a public roadmap board. So if you want to share with your community what you're working on, this is a really good way to be transparent with your community. Like, we're working on this right now. You could see we're sharing our progress with you on it. We do this, actually, and our community likes it a lot. It's like an extension of the early access concept of transparency. And the way card assignment works is that a member is assigned to a card, which represents a task, and then that member, that developer, is encouraged to post progress in the card, which then gets dumped into Slack. So Slack is sort of where everybody's sort of centralized and hanging out, if you will, and as you update your Trello cards that you're working on, everybody on the team gets to see in real time. So this is an example of, it's kind of hard to read. This is Milestone, competitive beta, and this is actually our next milestone for Insurgency on Source, is we're rolling out a beta version of our competitive esports matchmaking system. And sort of what we do is we outline all the different goals for this milestone, and we actually we do it in a checklist, so like when you click, you can click that it's complete, and then it would say like, 10, 15% complete as you complete things. But each task is actually linked to another card, which represents the task itself. So this is a very organized, like, this is what our goals are. It's due, it says March 11th, like that's when it's due. It's very straightforward to the team. Everybody on the team can just look at this and know exactly what's expected of them. And then this is an example of our Insurgency tasks board. So this is our internal project board for Insurgency. And you see we have QA, which are things that are being developed at the moment, or like have been completed but need testing, basically. And then we have our list of code things that need to be worked on with associated due dates and assignments to different developers. Same thing for levels, content, web, different aspects of the game, and also the outside of the game as well. This is our public roadmap for Insurgency. And you see our little, it's cool to beta test MS Paint image there. Basically, this is like what our community could see so that they know that we're not just doing nothing. They can see what's new, including Day of Infamy, which is our World War II mod that we released with our community. And then you can see the things that we're working on, such as Lewis scripting and competitive matchmaking. And we also let people vote. Like, you can vote on these cards, so like we can see what is most popular from our community with Trello as well. So we generally increase or like raise the cards that are most popular. So like if something has like 90 thumbs up, we put it to the top. If something has like 80 thumbs up, it's right below it or whatever. Since Slack is for team communication, as I mentioned, and it interacts with our infrastructure in various ways, which is really cool. And I would highly, highly recommend using this for your communication. I don't know, maybe some of you use Skype or something other than Slack, but Slack has been great for us, and we've integrated so many different like aspects of the outside of our game into our internal communications using Slack. With Trello, you get the updates and like screenshots get thrown right into our Slack, and they're filtered into different channels. Like we have like an animation channel, a coding channel, a Insurgency specific channel, a channel for our other projects, etc. And depending on where the card came from, it'll plop into the appropriate channel. The other thing is Steam community integration. So we get like a feed of like community screenshots that get posted on our Steam community. It's just kind of a social, cool thing to see like what our community is always doing all the time. And this also goes with Twitter. We have like a Twitter feed as well. So like when people tweet us, it goes right into our Slack also. So it's sort of a good way to keep the whole team informed of what everybody's talking about with the game instead of just the people that have their eyes on the Twitter or the Steam community. Jenkins is our like build server system, so it's like how we push builds, and we could push a build to Steam with a simple command. We type like push build Insurgency Steam on Slack, and bam, it does the whole process. And next thing you know, the new version is live on Steam. It's fantastic, and it's all done through Slack. So the next thing is Happy Fox. We use that for support. So like we get support tickets plopped right into Slack as well, and our cloud servers. So like we have game servers and also our infrastructure servers all in the cloud, and we could utilize we could access these different cloud servers using Slack as well. So for instance, we could update all of our game servers with a simple command on Slack, which is also super useful. So here's just an example. I just wanted to throw examples of all this. So this is like an example of a screenshot getting from Trello being automatically dumped into our Slack channel. And this is the work in progress Insurgency channel. That's what WIP stands for. And then this is our community channel, and you see the examples of different. This is actually the Twitter feed. And then somebody says, "You both announced your games would come to PS4 so long ago. What's up? Where are they?" And then Andrew, our creative director, responded, "Soon," because we actually just announced yesterday that we're developing a new Insurgency that will also be on console. And then we have a commits channel. So this interacts with our like source control management. So anytime somebody submits to our source control management, we get to see it right on here. So everybody knows when somebody submits something. So it's once again just a social thing. Like everybody's in touch with each other's work essentially. And this is the builds channel, which is where you see the whole process of building. Like when I type build Insurgency Steam, like there's multiple steps to actually getting the game up on Steam, including getting the latest content, compiling the code on Windows, Windows, Mac, and Linux, and then packaging it, and then uploading it, and all that. So it shows you each of the individual steps as it goes through. So then support, this goes to the tickets, or the support ticket system I was telling you guys about. And then these are just our other notable infrastructure that I thought was worth mentioning. We use Mumble for team meetings when things need to be announced or discussed. So we're not like hanging out on voice chat all day. Like we do have guys and girls all over the world, and we don't hang out on like voice chat all day. But we do get on voice when we like need to, when it's important. And Plastic for source control management. We used to use Perforce. We switched over to Plastic because they handle branching really well. Jenkins we use for our build processes. Happy Fox I mentioned earlier for our support ticket system. We use cloud servers, not physical servers. AWS for web server, test servers, stat server, and crash dump server / website. And we use DigitalOcean for our game servers. And so that's pretty much the whole presentation. I just figured I would talk a little bit about the future because we just announced yesterday Insurgency Sandstorm, which is our new Insurgency product that we are planning on shipping next year sometime. Basically, we're building off the success of Insurgency. We're bringing it to Unreal Engine 4 instead of Source Engine, which was the previous version that it was on. And on top of the game being a kind of a recreation and a lot higher quality and higher fidelity being on Unreal 4, it's also going to include some new things such as a story mode and new esports infrastructure for competitive, because competitive is one of these things that sort of come up as being a high demand thing within our community that we didn't build the source game around. We sort of built the game around the game we wanted to make and play, but then what ended up happening is that all of these people started to create leagues and clans, and they start competing against each other, and they want us to create the infrastructure for them to do that. And the game wasn't designed for that with that infrastructure in mind from the beginning. So Sandstorm is sort of representing the opportunity for us to design it with that in mind from the very get-go. And we also plan on doing things like split-screen console as well. And then these are some screenshots from Sandstorm that we released yesterday. Kind of hard to see and kind of low res because they're, but you can find them online. And that's the presentation. Yeah.
All right.
So questions?
Yeah, are there any questions?
Questions.
Hi. So this is like two questions with one opportunity for me to talk. The first one is, what clicked for you? When did you decide that you wanted to be a game developer? I know that it is easy for modders to get a job onto game developers, as you mentioned, but you studied computer science later on, and I'm sure you learned to solve, the general problems that one will learn when studying computer science. But what clicked for you to remain in the industry and, accomplish all this? And the second question is, the set of tools you mentioned, like Slack and the source control, everything, was that all set up when you shipped the first version, or how was it an iterative process, and how long did it took you to reach this level of contact with your clients, which are your players?
Sure.
Thanks.
Well, yeah, I'll start with the first question. That's an interesting question, because at first when I first started making mods, I was like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I want to do. But then, during mod development, a lot of sort of ugly things transpired with both of the mods that I worked on. A lot of drama. Like when people work on mods, they're not being paid, and therefore you get very passionate about your work because it's in your spare time, and you're putting in your spare hours of your day into this, and you become very attached to it. And since there's no flow from the top down in money, it's like everybody feels like they're an owner, And so I think some of the stress that I had working in modding actually made me question whether I really did want to go into game development a little bit. And during college, I studied computer science and history, and yeah, with my computer science degree, I learned that I could do other things. I could write programs for hospitals and do something good for humanity or something with my skills instead of making video games. I also thought that with my history being my major, a minor, I'm really passionate about history, and I sort of plan on incorporating it into a lot of my work going forward and in the past. But the thought of being a writer of some kind also was something I considered at one point. But how do you do that successfully? Basically it all came back full circle to me, like towards the end of college. Like, the beginning of college, I was like starting to like second guess it, and then by the end, I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. It took that like exploration at other things for me to realize that this is what I'm really passionate about and what I really want to do. So pretty much after college, I pretty much knew precisely at that point that I wanted to go into game development. And then with regards to your other question, this was a very iterative thing. What we have now, what I showed you all, in terms of our workflow and our organization and infrastructure, it's pretty new. I think Slack we've been using for about a year, maybe. Trello for like less than that, like maybe like 8 or 9 months or something. But keep in mind, our company's been around now for 4 or 5 years. So before that, I would say we were a fraction as organized as we are now. And this is the evolution of our organization. And that's the reason why I wanted to share it with this audience, because I figured that, this being a student audience, that everybody here, or a lot of you are perhaps on your own game projects or want to get involved in game creation. And knowing this from the very beginning will save you a lot of the headaches that we dealt with kind of going through it all ourselves and figuring it out and making mistakes and learning from them and things like that. So, yeah. Sure.
Yeah, hey, you talked about the importance of speaking with other devs from the community. Here in Portugal, our industry is just starting up, so I would like to ask, how is the community in New York? How is the indie community? Do you get together? Do you have meetings, events?
Well, it exists, but not really in our, I should say Insurgency's part of the industry. There's the gaming industry as a whole is very spread out among, there's PC gaming, there's console gaming, there's mobile gaming, there's free-to-play, there's premium, there's all different types. And I find that in New York, it's actually very heavily mobile and web-based. Not a whole lot of like actual premium game developers are based in New York. I think like Rockstar is there, and they're one of the few, but I think it's just their publishing division, not even their developing. It's really not a great place for development, honestly, because it's very expensive and hard to pay people sufficiently. It's a lot better to have a game company in a place where quality of life is a lot higher for a lot less money. And we actually recently started a studio in Amsterdam, and the thought being that we actually have a very strong European base with our developers and a lot of really talented European guys that I wanted to centralize. And the whole immigration thing in the US was very challenging, bringing them to the US. So we decided on Amsterdam because, like, for me, I wanted to be somewhere where I could speak English fluently. And the Dutch don't like to admit this, but their country is very English speaking, and pretty much everybody speaks English and doesn't get annoyed with you if you speak English. And the other consideration was like the UK, but UK is also very expensive, kind of like it would have been like London or something, and that would have been very expensive like New York. Amsterdam is a great creative city that's very affordable, quality of life is very high. So that's why we chose Amsterdam for the location. And I'm actually sort of in the process of moving to Amsterdam, so I can't quite say that I'll be in New York in the future. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Have you ever thought about making other type of games besides shooters, like adventure or something else?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a bunch of ideas for other types of games. I think the reason why we started with Insurgency and why we're still making even another Insurgency, the first one was sort of a no-brainer because we had this IP, this brand that we made as a mod when we were younger, and we all wanted to take it to completion. And plus, we also thought that, like, hey, people are going to know Insurgency, which will help us going into the launch of it. So it was sort of like unfinished business in a way with shipping the commercial version of Insurgency. We felt obligated that we had to do it. The reason why we are still doing Insurgency as well is because we feel like it's sort of still unfinished business in a way because we only got with it, and now that we have more resources, we kind of want to take it more fully to where we always wanted it to be. That being said, yes, I envision NWI, our company, in the long term having more of a diverse array of different types of games. Personally, I am very interested in strategy games, like real-time and turn-based strategy. And also, I have an idea for like a virtual reality exploration game that I want to do like later once virtual reality is a little further along, pretty much, yeah.
Questions? Is there a question back there? Sorry.
I have two questions.
Sure.
The first is, you mentioned that when you started working on your first mod, you gathered a team around the world. But exactly how did this process occur? Did you, how did people believe that they could have a contribution to the project you were working on since their vision? The second question is, I am in a video game development course, and everyone has all these original ideas floating around, but they never get to it. They just don't know how. They can't visualize how it will end, how it will start, even. Even when we need to work on these projects for our classes, as soon as difficulties start to arise and the process becomes repetitive, suddenly everyone has much better things to do elsewhere. So how can you keep people motivated in a single project, something that they just don't know how it will end?
That's a good question. It was very challenging, and a lot of people came and left because they couldn't get behind it. But I think you have to like show them that you're dedicated and that you have the experience to do this whether they join you or not. And if you can kind of demonstrate that, then people will sort of get behind you because they could either be a part of it or they won't be a part of it. Yeah, I think that though that there is definitely a lot of desire for everybody to get their own ideas and their own influence in on something, and that's part of the reason why mod development is especially challenging compared to game development. I would say is because you kind of have to somebody has to assert themselves as being in charge in a way. And in regards to your second question, I couldn't fully understand. Sorry, what you were saying. If you could just clarify.
It has two components. It's first thing is how do you start working on a concept, something very abstract, and also how do you keep people motivated in that same concept and stay loyal to it to the end?
Yeah. So for the first part, I think you have to first get a very strong vision in your own head, what the plan is and what you want to accomplish. And then you have to put it on paper. Like you have to put it, like we use Google Docs, like everybody uses Google Docs now. So like, write it out and like challenge yourself to try and figure out what is wrong with this initial idea, how it could be improved upon, how it could be better, and get it to the point where all it takes is somebody to read a page of information explaining what the goal is, and they'll just get excited about it. Like, you have to be able to be a good writer in a way if you're going to be a creative coming up with game concepts. Like, you have to be able to pitch your idea to your coworkers or people working for you for nothing. Honestly, it's hard for me to even think about that back then because I think that developing mods the way that we did when we made them is sort of unheard of now a little bit. Like, it's sort of deteriorated a lot because of the indie world now. Like now people can create their own game and commercialize it for very little money. Back then we couldn't. Like literally, if you wanted to make a game, like a cool game that was different, that hadn't been done before within the space, you didn't have the money or resources and you were too inexperienced to get a job in the industry. The only option was modding. So that's another reason why a lot of people would get behind our ideas and be a part of our projects, was because like this is something that they wanted to do. They wanted to be a part of a mod, and better to be a part of this one than some other one. And I think with Insurgency, I was able to bring in a lot of talent because of my experience with Red Orchestra, which by then a lot of people had heard of, and it sort of allowed me to recruit pretty easily.
Right. Question? Hi. So my question is pretty simple. Can I get a free key?
Sure. Yeah.
I was kidding, but no, now the real question.
Anything else?
No, the real question now. I was wondering, since you presented the press opinion versus the people opinion, as an indie developer, did you have more difficulty trying to find the appealing reason of the companies? You know, they usually give generic reviews like, oh, it's a shooter, go buy another one, or something like that. How did you struggle with that or overcome it? And how did you do it, basically?
Yeah.
Did you, with the strong community that you had since the beginning, since the early access, how did you build on it, and how did you create a better game? Then, yes.
Yeah. So no, it's a good point, because like that is sort of what people like. Any like casual journalist that may not play shooters very often will play our game or like hear about our game, and they're just automatically going to think like, oh, this is whatever. This is like another shooter. It takes sort of a more advanced journalist that like has played the different types of shooters and whatnot to really be able to put their finger on what makes our game really distinct. I think that branding turned into a really important aspect of marketing for our game, defining what is the Insurgency experience and coming up with the right words to describe what that is. Because a lot of for instance, like a lot of when people play our game, one of the first things that comes to their mind is realism. It's realistic. But we actually avoid using that terminology when we're discussing our game, because it also it brings about certain expectations that the game doesn't stick to. In a lot of other ways, like, for instance, the factions in the game are not necessarily realistic, and the game modes are not necessarily realistic. Like, we do things that are fun for gameplay, but there are certain elements of the game that are realistic, like the gunplay, for instance, and so we coin terms like gritty and like a game for veterans and like a more mature game as well. Like a lot of our audience is a lot older. We have a lot of mature gamers that are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, playing our game, and we don't have the same like young teen Call of Duty audience. So we kind of try and figure out ways to brand our game as being a distinct experience from other games out there.
Right. Any further questions?
There's kind of a trend now, or at least some games try to make asymmetrical multiplayer games, like Evolve and stuff. And I wanted to ask your opinion about competitive games that, like, it's 1 player versus 4 instead of 4 versus 4. And if that's some idea you want to maybe implement in the next iteration of Insurgency.
Well, I do like asymmetry, but to me that's like the extreme of it, and to me that, like, for competitive, that seems very challenging to create like a fair competitive game, a game that's fair on both sides when each side is so distinct from each other. My feeling on asymmetry is I like it as long as it's not like crazy over the top. Like, to me that's a very extreme example. We use asymmetry in Insurgency. The Insurgent team is pretty different than the security team. They get like the AK for free, and like the security team doesn't get any weapons for free. And there's certain things, like another thing too is like security gets like their armor for free and like their chest rig for free. It's sort of based on like a little bit based on reality, but like tailored to our gameplay. and also to make the game more unique in that sense, that it's not just like both teams have the same weapons, there's the same prices, and completely gravy from a competitive standpoint. So that's sort of my perspective on it. Like I like it, but we don't have any plans for Sandstorm of like doing anything that extreme when it comes to asymmetry. Yeah.
There's a guy over here. Hi, my question is about the Linux community and how the port to Linux went on. Did you get a well-received port? Was it good? How do you feel about porting to Linux? Will your future games continue to port Linux?
Yeah, so the Linux community is very vocal. I kind of wish that that video I was showing you guys like finished, because at the very end it says "end Linux support," and then it shows like a bunch of penguins all over the place. So part of the answer to your question is that yeah, we did get the game supporting Linux. It took us a while, and people were very vocal about it up until that point. But we did get the support in. I feel pretty good about the Linux version. There's a couple of things about it that are not perfect, like shadows are not properly rendered, and we're kind of waiting on outside forces to deal with that. Things out of our control. And so, but for the future, for Sandstorm, like yes, it'll support Linux from the very beginning. UE4 is very cross-platform friendly. So like straight out of the box, it supports Windows, Mac, Linux, PS4, Xbox One, you name it. So we plan on supporting all those platforms.
Hi. When you're hiring new developers, what are the main characteristics you search for?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, obviously, like raw talent is important. You know, so portfolio is like usually the first thing that we look at. You know, if your portfolio isn't great, then you know you might kind of get skipped very quickly. But then beyond that, obviously, there's certain characteristics that are important. I think, like I said before, like one of the things was like that's important to me is being able to find where you fit in instead of needing to be micromanaged. And I think that's sort of something that comes with experience. So I think experience is part of it too. Like what level of experience do you have, like working with teams in general and on games in general, or is this your first time? Because if it's your first time, then there's going to be some bumps in the road that you kind of naturally are going to bump into, I think, unless you're just natural. But I think I'm trying to think. My interview process is it's changed a bit because initially I hired some people that were regrettable, and I think negativity is one of the worst qualities in people, like, or being too serious. You know, like I kind of like a little bit of lightheartedness and excitedness, you know, from people that I hire. But really, it comes down to talent and experience. And you know, if it doesn't work out, like, you know, it won't work out, and maybe 3 months later they won't be with us anymore. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of like I just naturally like ask the developer all the questions I have on my mind, and it kind of varies depending on the position, because different positions kind of require different personalities and skill sets and stuff. But we are actually hiring right now. We're looking for a UI artist and a environment artist as well. So if any of you guys are good at that, you know, you can come find me. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Cool.
Sadly, that was all the time we had for questions, but let's give a big round of applause for Jeremy.